Welcome to The Impact Effect, hosted by conscious leadership expert Tom Eddington, advisor to some of the world's most successful companies and CEOs, where each week we help executives, entrepreneurs, and organizers become more effective leaders while growing businesses that are making an impact in the world. And now, here's Tom.
Welcome to the Impact Effect Network. I'm Tom Eddington, your host. My guest today is a longtime friend and colleague, Hurst. Welcome, Aaron.
Great to be here with you.
Love to have you on the show, Aaron. In the 20 or so years we've known each other, the journey you've taken, the impact you've had in the world has been exceptional. They're rare people who've been able to impact two major sectors of our society, and you've managed to do it in just a couple of decades. So I'm really looking forward to getting into a conversation with you today. And I'd like to start by just asking you to share a bit with our viewers and our listeners about your background and experience.
Thank you. And you've been an inspiration for, much of the work I've done. Just sort of seeing what you've done and the courage you've had in your career really sort of, to me, embodies everything that I've worked on. So it's just been an honor, knowing you and calling you a friend. In my background, I've been very interested overall in this idea of increasing consciousness, increasing this sense that we all have an opportunity to make a greater impact when we are more conscious, both in sort of a global scale, but also just in our daily lives. So, my last organization, which is where we met, was the Taproot Foundation, which was a nonprofit that was really working to get business professionals to use their professional skills, marketing, HR, tech, finance, to help nonprofits be able to, build their capacity in those areas and scale that across the country and then ultimately around the world, and really sort of change the way people were thinking about their careers, change the way they were thinking about giving back. And you were a huge part of that. And then more recently, I've been really focused in on was first sort of really naming the economy that we're in right now, the purpose economy, and really sort of building this case that purpose is critical to individual and organizational success. And then I've just been on a journey really figuring out how do we activate that sense of conscious leadership, the sense of values-based leadership, the sense of purpose in the workforce on a massive scale. Because doing it on a small scale has never been my goal. It's like, how do we create that cliche sea change? So that's sort of the quick version.
Well, thank you for the quick version. We're going to dive into that a bit more. One of the things I've always respected and admired about you is the audacity to take on the sorts of things that you've envisioned. And I've always held you as a bit of a possibilityist. From the first conversations we had when you were sharing with me your vision of bringing professional services to the nonprofit sector through pro bono work, the audacity of your dream was quite remarkable. And I'd love to know a bit more about what is it about you and your DNA, your makeup, that enabled you to just be so audacious in your vision and your dreams?
I think it's a combination of things. I think one is privilege. I mean, I come from a family where I've never had to worry fundamentally about where's the next meal coming from. I've had family members that have set a very high bar, not just of economic success, but always stating if you don't leave the world fundamentally in a better place, than you found it, you didn't do a good job. The sort of idea from the Jewish tradition of repair the world, which to me is this very audacious statement of repair the world, which no one could ever do. But it's sort of that's what we should always be striving for. And that's the audacity sort of and humility built into it at the same time. I think what fuels me on a more daily basis on that theme, I'm constantly asking the question, what if? What if we did this? What if we tried that? What if we applied this? And when you do that, occasionally, most of the time, you end up with the if is garbage, right? It's nothing would happen. But every once in a while, you land on a what if that makes sense. What if we were able to get pro bono work to be not just for lawyers? Crap, that makes total sense. And then once that's in your brain, until that happens, it becomes almost I treat it almost like a mental illness. You're so obsessed, and people always are how do you become an entrepreneur? And I'm to me, it's almost like a mental health, it's wishing mental health issues upon somebody, because you just see it and you can't stop until you get there. And then I think I was very lucky to have some early jobs where I had an opportunity to learn enough about a lot of different things that it again gave me the arrogance to think I could do things that probably in retrospect maybe wasn't the smartest. Especially getting my first sort of tech job was in product management, which was wonderful because it enabled me to work on technology, marketing, finance. Like you were basically like a mini CEO in a sense. And I think through that, it gave me a sense of all the different parts of a business, which also just gave me the sense of possibility.
Well, one of the things that has surprised me about you is that with that responsibility or opportunity or possibility of repairing the world, I've never experienced that that's a burden for you. It's always felt like it's come with creativity and enthusiasm and joy. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I think my general approach, I love to do the what if, and then I like to design things. And there's a lot of joy in designing the prototype to show that something's possible. So like with pro bono work early on, people are like, no, it doesn't work. It doesn't get done. And like, it was fun to figure out like, what is a design that would come up for that and make that work. The managing that year 6, 7 is not my strength. But I think that design process to me and the collaboration and like trying things, having them fail, doing that, like to me is just a process full of joy, disappointment and joy sort of together. And I think I've also worked in fields where I think the impact of it's not as direct, which I think shields me from some of that weight. So, if I right now was in an emergency room, nurse or doctor, like that is such an immediate burden. Helping a nonprofit have a better HR system is like a big impact, but it's not something where you immediately like the consequence of failure is not tremendous or helping that professional. So I think I've tried to do things that are ripple effect, and I think the people who are really courageous and hold that burden are the ones who are sort of on that front line with the human being that's going to like survive or not survive as a result of that. And that to me is like where the weight would exist and why I could like I'm a major animal, I'm a vegan, like I'm a big animal rights. I could never work in that field because the weight of that would crush me. I had to find something that like was far enough removed that it could be playful and feel okay.
Hmm. Well, I love the spirit of what you bring to the work you do. And for me, those are two of the dimensions or two of the aspects of being a conscious leader. And I don't think you and I've ever specifically had a conversation around conscious leadership, but for me, my experience of you is that you're very conscious about the actions you take, the way you show up, the commitments you make, and your commitment to delivering on those commitments you've made.
No, I appreciate that, and I think there's I'm still very much on that journey, and to me, it's like constantly trying to find the place of hope to fuel you versus the fear piece, right? And I think our whole country and the whole world's right now on that edge, and I think a lot of for me being a conscious leader is helping others also just move towards hope instead of fear.
Well, that the critical word you said is journey. I mean,
Yeah.
it is a journey. There isn't a specific destination. There's not a milestone where you achieve conscious leadership and say, I've arrived. I can just call it a day. And it very much requires, from my experience, to live in hope, to live in love, not to live in fear.
Yeah, no, it does. And I think and then in that there's a lot of contradictions and there's a lot of things that like trip you up and there's a lot of forces inside and outside that like pull you in different directions. And that the word conscious is so important because that's when you notice when that's happening. And it's what enables you to like make the choices. Or if you make the wrong choice, being able to correct path. And that to me is like, I think a lot of the work I do now with my company Imperative is like helping people pull out and having that reflection time. Because it's really hard to be conscious unless we have reflection time, and technology has actually ripped most of our reflection time out of our lives, and people are just responding, and you can't be conscious leader if you're just in a response mode. And we need to basically reprogram, I think, the way we interact with the world to build that reflection time in. It is sorely missing, and it's leading to, I think, many of the problems we're seeing in the business world, politically, et cetera.
Aaron, so just picking up on what you just shared, for me, I make a distinction between reacting and responding, and you were referencing responding. And for me, I think of a reaction is what I observe oftentimes, and it's coming from the amygdala as opposed to responding, which is coming from the prefrontal cortex. And unfortunately, a lot of what I witness in behaviors is that most people are just reacting to their environment, the external stimuli or what's coming from their computer. And I'd love to see more people responding where they're actually taking that millisecond to move whatever their auditory or verbal or physical reaction to their prefrontal cortex or their human brain is actually resulting in some sense of executive function around an actual thought out response to what's happening.
No, and it's hard. I think social media and technology has made that much harder than in the past. And then I think you and I talked about it years ago, but the whole goalkeeper theory, where for a goalie, the best thing to do is to stand in the middle statistically. But if they do that and they miss, they're blamed for being lazy and not doing anything. So they tend to jump one way or the other. Just even if they miss, at least they show effort. And
Right.
I think that's true of us in general. Like we tend to act as the response to things instead of realizing sometimes the best thing to do is to actually take a moment and hold the ground of where we are. And I think our society generally rewards the idea of immediate action.
Yep.
Which is why I think we spend a tremendous amount of time that's fundamentally wasted or actually going backwards.
Right. I just want to pick up on something you said before about imperative, and I'd love to dive into imperative and the work you're doing as an organization and your seminal book, The Purpose Economy, and naming the economy that we're in right now. And would love to explore that a little bit just in terms of what is imperative, what is the purpose economy, what is the work that you're doing. And for me, I look at that through the lens of conscious leadership and would love to explore that with you.
Yeah, I think there's sort of two different threads there. So on the purpose economy, that work was built off of my uncle's work, who coined the term information economy in the 70s, and really seeing the same pattern he saw when we were moving out of an industrial economy into an information economy that I was seeing in changes in consumer behavior and in the workforce, that the need for meaning, for fulfillment, for purpose was actually starting to change how people were choosing jobs, how they were approaching their careers, how they were shopping, how we were building. And this is being driven by everything from climate change to just more and more resources available to address this, and the rise of fields like positive psychology, and really just for predicting, as we're seeing now, that companies are now using purpose as a guiding force, that it's become common vernacular now, and marketing has become common vernacular in the workforce. And I think a lot of that stems from the fact that this is now the thing people are yearning for in society. So it was really gratifying to put that out in the world and have such an amazing response to it, and now see CEOs signing up for this idea that the bottom line is not the only variable, and that this whole idea of stakeholder-driven business is critical, because that is when you start to get conscious, when you realize it's not just sort of myopically about one thing. Imperative is aside from that, as a technology company that I started, that's really around how do we power that kind of change inside organizations and for individuals. And what we found early on was 66% of the workforce is unfulfilled. And if you think about that, that's a really sad fact. When you think about that in terms of actual human beings, if you just think of it as a stat, it's a stat. But when you think about that in terms of humans and teams, and we also found it's very unlikely if you're unfulfilled at work that you're fulfilled in life. This old mythology of work can be terrible, but you've got your synagogue, you've got your sports, you've got your family. It doesn't work that way, because we're one sort of biological unit, right? So what we have found is trying to really figure out how to shrink the change. What are the few things people need to do to actually move out of that mindset, to move out of that space? And the two things statistically that we found were predictors of whether or not someone was fulfilled or not. The first was even just, this is the biggest one, knowing what fulfills you. And our education system, our workplace teaches you about your strengths, which to me is teaching you what kind of Swiss Army knife you are. Tom, you've got a great toothpick and a knife, but it doesn't really tell you who you are at your core and what fulfills you. So that was the first one. And we built the first ever assessment that determined psychologically the purpose of every employee, so that someone could start to build that awareness, because it was so clear there was a connection between knowing sort of who you are and then actually being that person. Shocking, right? The second one is people who were fulfilled were much more likely to lean on their peers as a support network versus just management, and that they engage in what we call peer coaching. So instead of relying on like having to hire an executive coach or needing some kind of external force, they naturally were talking to peers and processing their thoughts, their emotions, their priorities with someone else who is in a similar situation and building empathy through that process. And in a sense, constantly like applying an agile process to their work and their approach to the world. So what Imperative really is a technology platform. We're venture-backed, where people first create a profile that uncovers what their purpose is from a scientific basis. And then it's a video platform where every 2 weeks, someone has a peer coaching conversation for an hour with with a peer inside their company. We have 4 questions that guide them each time that like really help them rise sort of that conscious level. They do 5 conversations over a quarter. So every 2 weeks, they're doing a conversation, and then they switch partners. So it becomes this like encoded behavior where you start to sort of build this idea of every 2 weeks having that reflection time with a peer, building that bond, and then over time meeting all these people in your company or organization that you would have met otherwise, which I think is also going to be key to us overcoming a lot of the inclusion issues in the workplace today. We simply don't know how to talk to people who are different from us. We're intimidated by it. This gives them permission and a structure to actually realize that person who may not look like you actually has a lot in common with you, and you have a lot to learn from them. So, we're now, have rolled this out in companies across the country, and are just seeing, especially with COVID, with Black Lives Matter, this has just become a lifeline for people to feel connected, to process what's going on with them. And it's finally acknowledging the importance of relationships and psychology in the workplace. And I do think your frame, like, it is all at the end of the day about being conscious. And it's creating the practice of consciousness in a pragmatic way for a virtual workforce, in a modern workplace.
Well, I love the work you're doing, and I really appreciate that it's both coming out of psychology and science and using technology in a constructive and helpful way. And as you're describing what you're up to, one of the first things that comes to mind for me is to have that peer-to-peer relationship requires trust.
Yep.
And to have trust, you have to have safety. And safety
Yep.
can only come about from being seen, being
Yep.
heard, and being appreciated. And
Yep.
I'd love to hear, how do you help employers and help individual employees in those companies feel safe? How do you help
Yep.
them develop that level of trust?
So I think there's broader trust and safety, and then there's like trust and safety in that relationship. I think building it relationship by relationship starts to build it throughout the organization. What we found is, and sort of the secret sauce to our platform to a large degree is, so Tom, if you take our purpose profile and we understand like what drives you, we're embedding that content into the conversation. So the first question you and I might have together would insert like, Tom, like, given that you get purpose from X, Y, and Z, what kind of impact do you want to be making at work right now? What that does is it starts you off with an abundance mindset instead of a deficit mindset. And it has me see you at your very best, which causes you then to want to come forward that way. So it's triggering that abundance mindset, which immediately, like, it's amazing how much that builds immediate trust and safety. We just did a study where we were looking at people who had done 3 conversations, just 3 of them. And, I think 97% said they now had a meaningful relationship, a trusted relationship. Someone who actually, they say, cares about them, is a champion for their growth. And it's because we're using psychology and because we're always lifting people up in those conversations. It makes all the difference. Whereas if 2 people just sat down and started talking, it's pretty, they're both going to start with insecurity with a new person most of the time. And as a result, it's going to take a while for that to thaw. And I've just been amazed at, like, strangers we get together, and after an hour of just conversation, like, they have a commitment to stay in touch. They feel like they've been seen in a way they haven't felt seen in years. And this is with a stranger. And it's just because we're giving the right psychological guidelines to make that possible.
You're watching the Impact Effect Network. Who you are is how you lead. Conscious leadership is an intuitive, intentional process requiring an open heart, an open mind, and a committed desire to fully own how you show up in the world. If you're a CEO, a solopreneur, or a community leader, Tom Eddington's ebook helps you amplify your strengths, making you the best version of yourself. Download the ebook today and become a part of bringing conscious leadership to the planet.
The companies you're working with, what do they see happening in terms of organization culture and culture change? What are they seeing in terms of employee engagement? What are they seeing in terms of productivity and impact on whatever metrics they're using for measuring success?
Yeah, so I think they're looking at a couple of things. So one, we're seeing about at the end of each conversation, people make a pledge of something they're going to do before the next session, and we're seeing 80% of those are completed. So I think a big part for the company is just seeing that behavior change, seeing that action, and then 98% of those people are saying directly is impacting their engagement level at the company. So we're seeing this sort of real increase in what's traditionally been called engagement. I don't like that term personally. I use fulfillment, which is a whole hour-long lecture. I'll spare you today. And then what they're reporting is that they're seeing higher levels of inclusion, where people are actually like feeling like safety, higher retention. They're having individuals reporting like increases in productivity, and you're seeing a lot of just stories. Like one of my favorite recently, I think it was from like last week, two people got connected from totally different departments, other parts of the country, and they both realized they're working on the exact same duplicate project. And just because the company was so big, they had no idea that they were doing this thing twice. And it was like randomly through like this peer coaching, they actually both realized like, wait, actually one of us could do something totally like different than what I'm doing. And that's sort of an extreme version of that. But we hear all the time people like realizing they're working on the wrong goal, or they have a conflict with one person that they don't realize how toxic that is. And they hadn't even named it for themselves that that person was the issue. So then they've been able to go in and actually like fix that relationship. So I mean, especially early on, like we're just seeing so many anecdotal stories of like things that normally could like derail someone, maybe for the day, maybe for a month, maybe for their career, sort of getting surfaced and addressed.
Well, two things that come out of that for me. So
Yep.
one is there's been a maxim that I've used with the work I've done with clients for years, is that people join great companies and they leave bad managers.
Yep.
And what are the employers who are working with you, what are they noticing, or what are they seeing around employee retention? What are they seeing
Yep.
around reasons why people leave an organization?
It's hard right now just because of COVID and everything else going on to be able to like separate some of these variables. A lot of the work we do is manager to manager peer coaching. Managers are actually the ones we're finding get the most benefit out of this, because that job, no matter what department you're in, has a lot of similarities, and it's a very hard job. You're not only taking care of yourself, you're taking care of the team. You're often undertrained in that. And the big move right now is to have managers develop coaching skills. So they're not solving problems for their team, they're actually helping them solve their own problems. And what we're finding is that managers are starting to take on these skills from doing the peer coaching with another manager, and then starting to play with their teams, and seeing them become more effective in that way, listening, realizing there's diversity of perspective, moving out of a fear-based mindset into that abundance mindset. So again, like anecdotally, because most of this work we've been doing in the last 9 months, so it is very skewed by like the world's conditions. But we are seeing people who feel like their manager is much more empathetic all of a sudden, who feel like they can coach, who's not just getting triggered by things, and who feels the manager themselves like, I'm part of a tribe, I'm part of a community, instead of feeling isolated. And with people working from home, just that simple ability to feel like you've got a true human connection that's not Zoom, it's not a happy hour, it's like real meaningful conversation, like is like such like the ROI on that's just, as we see more and more data, is just going to be so obvious.
Well, that was going to be my follow-up question: is what
Yep.
what are companies noticing around the people who they have in manager roles? What are they seeing around what are the training and the skills that are necessary to be an effective manager? Are they moving people out of managerial roles because they were misplaced in those roles?
I haven't seen that yet, Tom. I think what we're seeing is, again, this emphasis on the coaching skill, like listening, being able to understand the individual personal needs of each person on your team instead of having this sort of generic response to things. We're seeing more of like recognition of the human side of management. So seeing more of that, I think in terms of having people sort of move out of that. I mean, I do suspect as people reflect, if some people don't naturally like managing people, they're probably going to find that and sort of opt out of that, which, all those cliches about, people who are high performers getting moved into management who shouldn't, and the Peter principle, et cetera. So I think we will see that. It hasn't been so far, I would say, a direct output. I think it's been much more just seeing that inclusiveness, seeing like addressing burnout, some of these sort of more, I think, fire drill issues in the current workplace.
So with what you've seen in the last 9 months, are you already ready to draw some conclusions? And I mean, what I'm hearing in what you're sharing is a real sense of optimism and hopefulness about the impact of this work.
Yeah, I mean, when we're successful at scale, I mean, I think this is going to be the counterweight to social media. It's going to be like actual social interaction, and that we're going to find that, all the dopamine hits from following Facebook and doing all that needs to be counterbalanced by technology enabling us to like have real conversations that are not about conspiracy theories, are not about things that pop up on our feed. Like they're actually connecting as human beings. And I think we're going to see that. We saw a lot around, when we saw a lot of the unrest around Black Lives Matter sort of spike earlier this year, we saw so much of that coming up in the conversations on our platform. And I think what we're going to find is there's going to be a major movement to move technology to enable true interface with the brain in a positive way. Instead of just trying to like optimize it for advertising purposes, and that this is going to really change corporate culture. But then ultimately, I think we're going to start seeing it in educational systems, and then I'm hoping eventually we'll figure out a way to use this so that one day red states and blue states can somehow be connecting and having these kinds of conversations, and we can start have that become the overriding model versus our Facebook stream. So I think my conclusion in this is like we have the opportunity here to be like the anti-Facebook. In terms of really turning around, I think that very negative part of sort of technology's evolution over the last 10 years.
Well, I know that's aspirational, but I've known you long enough to know that it won't be long before that becomes a reality.
Well, if it's us or someone else does it, I think it's inevitable. Like the science all points in that direction. And if we're going to turn our society around, it's going to take that kind of intervention. It's not going to be technology telling us what to think. It's going to be technology creating space for us to act as human beings.
Right.
So
yeah, with the film that I just had a world premiere for last week that I've been working on for the last several years, The Third Harmony, the message of the film is that the story we've been told throughout our lifetime, as it we're a violent species, we can't help ourselves, and the message of the film is that it's the complete opposite, that we are a nonviolent species, and to live from a place of nonviolence requires three harmonies: harmony within ourselves, harmony with other people, and harmony with nature. And what I love about the work you're doing is it's enabling the creation of that harmony within ourselves and with others.
No, absolutely. And I think that enables you to connect to, I think, that third harmony in some ways, because you become open to it instead of feeling like attack. I love it. I'm excited to see that. And I often like debate that because there are a lot of things I see, especially as someone who's a vegan and animal rights, the amount of violence we perpetrate on animals, to me, like it's hard to see humans as not being sort of aggressive, violent creatures when you sort of look at it in terms of factory farming and a lot of what we've done along those lines. But I think, I see it more as like we're constantly in that balance place. And I think if we can tip it and tip that general mindset, I think that is like such a huge contribution. So I'm really excited to see that.
You're watching the Impact Effect Network. Is your team tuned out? Are you looking for a powerful speaker to motivate and inspire your organization? Then Tom Eddington is the choice for keynote speaker at your next conference or event. Tom is one of the most sought-after business advisors and coaches in Silicon Valley. For over 2 decades, Tom has advised world-renowned CEOs and executives on how to catapult their organization's success, including Hewlett-Packard, NBNA Corporation, and Royal Dutch Shell. In his dynamic keynotes, Tom offers fresh new paradigms on how to create healthier, happier, and more purposeful workplaces while navigating change and generating higher degrees of success for organizations. For information on booking Tom at your next event, contact eddingtonadvisory.com.
Well, with business driving the agenda of the world and you working in the workplace, it seems obvious to me that the tools, the resources, what you're bringing to the workplace is going to enable business to achieve some of the things that you've set out to do. Because when folks learn things in the workplace, they're bringing it home to their families, they're bringing it home to their friends, and it's got to have a ripple effect on communities.
Yeah, if you're coming home, or in this case, you're staying home because you're working from home, it's definitely going to make an impact. We've all seen that in our lives, like what happens when a partner, kids are sort of exposed to those different energies. It has a big difference. And Tom, this is actually an area where I've struggled a lot recently, just around what is that role of business? Because I think Taproot was at the very sort of at the beginning, a sort of major momentum around the idea of like government's failed, business can save the day, and like let's go help business, nonprofits, the sort of hero of business. And I do struggle a little bit with like, is the work I've done in some ways help to perpetrate the story that government is not the answer, when I do believe that like with a lot of the problems we're facing, business is not the right solution for many of these problems. And I feel like I've been part of telling that mythology of sort of business saving the day. And that's one of the things I'm really grappling with right now, especially in our political environment of how do we change that story to be like business is great and society is more important, government's more important, and that business left unchecked, like we're seeing with technology, it is solely self-interested the way that it's currently structured. I'm curious like where you are in your sort of journey with that topic.
Yeah, so for me, it's at least where I have experienced it is that business is driving the agenda of the world.
Hmm.
Leaders of businesses aren't trained, aren't prepared for the responsibilities that they've inherited,
Yep.
and they are acting in irresponsible ways, either consciously or unconsciously. Um, and so I don't view business as out there to save the world. Um, and business leaders by and large are not prepared to do that. So I absolutely agree with you that there is a critical role for government to play. There's a critical role for the nonprofit sector to play. There's a critical role for the academic sector to play. But in the last several decades, business has taken on an oversized role. And
Yep.
there's a lot of expectations inappropriately placed on business, a lot of expectations placed on business leaders
Yep.
that aren't fair because they weren't trained, they're not prepared, they don't have what they need to fulfill those responsibilities and
They're not structurally
expectations.
set up for it, right? I mean, there's
Correct.
and that was like the big piece of the nonprofit sector when I was doing a lot of that work is nonprofits were never built to scale to solve problems. They were meant to be for like niche needs that the government wasn't going to address, or as like an R&D lab for government programs. Like that was really how it was designed. And all of a sudden it was asked to like replace whole government programs. And it's like the funding models, the talent pipeline, nothing was built, like the sector wasn't built for that.
Right.
And similarly, like companies aren't built for a lot of the things we're asking them to do. And it doesn't mean we can't change that, but to your point, we can't just assume that like in their current manifestation that they can achieve that goal.
Yeah, and that's part of what inspired me to launch the Impact Effect Network and these conversations in this show is to help round out the education of business leaders to help them become more conscious and holistic or systemic in their thinking. And if we look throughout human history, leaders of countries, leaders of geographies had a lifetime of training and preparation to assume the role as a king or a queen or a leader of their country. And business leaders don't have the benefit of having that kind of training and
Yep.
preparation. And yet
No,
they
it's
have
such a new
this.
industry, a new field. I mean, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
No. And it's interesting. A lot of the metaphors for business are sports,
Mhm.
and the sort of idea of win or lose. Like that's sort of the like that is the point, right? You either win or you lose. And I was really inspired to see the NBA and a couple of the teams, in the last month in the playoffs, like basically just walk off the court and say some things are bigger than winning or losing. And I think that was really, hopefully, an inspiration to a lot of leaders to really help them put their work in perspective, because that was like something that you would just never have seen before, and like is just shocking in a historic context. And to have other, I think, leaders in other settings to be able to take those kind of bold acts and to realize like winning and losing is not always the sort of right way to frame this. I'm hoping will start to further enhance like what you're doing.
And it's as human beings, we're not hardwired to be focused on winning or losing. We're a collaborative species, and that's part of our true nature. That's part of our makeup is to collaborate. It's what we want to do. It's what feeds our soul.
But isn't it both collaborative, but it's also tribal? How do you think about that, or do you feel like the tribal narrative is not true?
The tribal narrative is true, but as the world has gotten smaller because of connectivity, our tribe has grown. And yes, we do have. I mean, at the end of the day, in business, people do business with people they know, they like, and they trust. But
Yep.
the work that you're doing is helping people trust beyond their work group. It's helping
Yep.
them develop trust and relationship with other.
No, and I think the thing I always struggle with a little bit is just like I'm a big New York Yankees fan, for better or worse, and that's a tribe. And I have no interest in like becoming friendly with the Red Sox tribe. Like, and it's amazing how much like you can like sort of look at discrimination through and tribalism through that lens. I think sports are a big part of how we've done that, and how much satisfaction you get out of rooting for a team and sort of being behind that tribe, being part of something bigger. And I mean, part of what I'm hearing you say is like, can you get those same needs met where it's not a zero-sum game? Sports is a zero-sum equation generally. And I think the work we are doing is trying to build those bridges. Does it mean I want to have a pure coaching conversation with a Red Sox fan? I need to think about that. That's a challenging question, but I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, and to that point, not to get off track too much, but with the release of the film last week, we released a board game, and the premise and the opportunity of the board game is to actually practice collaboration. And so if you're playing
That's
the
cool.
game, you're learning nonviolent skills. And the only way you can win is if everybody wins. It requires collaboration to quote unquote win the game. It's not a zero-sum game.
That's cool.
It's the focus of the game is to keep playing the game. And
So it's the opposite of like Monopoly or the game of life.
or sports or
Yep.
most things that we grew up with, which are
Yep.
counter to who we're hardwired to be as a species.
Yeah. No, I love it. I'd love to see that. Reminds me a lot of like Lego, which is what I love doing with my son when he was a little younger. It's like that is like a collaborative effort. It
Yes.
feels like a game and you get to like an end goal, but it is much more in the act of creation.
Yep.
So that's terrific.
Well, Aaron, it's been absolutely wonderful having you on the show today. And I would just ask, what's the one message you would like our viewers and listeners to take away from the show?
I think it's really what I shared in the research, like make sure you know who you are so that you can be that. And make sure you always are surrounding yourself with peers that you can work with to reflect and to come back to center and intentionality and consciousness. And I think those two simple things, if you build those into your life, it's amazing how much they'll shift mindset and help you, be a conscious leader in your language.
And for folks that want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Email works as well as anything else, aaron@imperative.com. So love hearing from folks. I try to be as accessible as possible because I think everyone out there is doing courageous work. And if I can help, I want to be part of it.
Well, terrific. Thanks for the time today, Aaron. I really enjoyed the conversation. It's always great to catch up with you.
Right back at you.
You're watching the Impact Effect Network. Thank you for joining Tom Eddington on the Impact Effect. Visit impacteffectnetwork.com to connect with Tom and discover additional episodes featuring today's top leaders making a global impact through conscious leadership in the world today.